If a fire broke out in Iowa City before the mid-1850s, remember now we were established in 1839, people probably rushed to the scene forming bucket brigades that would stretch from the fire to perhaps the nearest well or cistern. And we had cisterns downtown, one for sure, that appears on one of the early maps that I have. Now, jumping way ahead for a moment, we all know the term hook and ladder truck. The ladder part's obvious, but what is the hook? The hook was used to grab onto the building, in some cases a ring that was part of the building structure, and pull a wall or other part of the structure down so that water could better reach the fire. That's my understanding of the hook. I don't know if Iowa City ever used a hand-operated pumping device such as this one, but it represented an advancement over the traditional bucket brigade. It was probably in the 1850s that steam fire engines first appeared in the country. These were mounted on horse-drawn carts and used to provide hose pressure via a pumping mechanism. On March 27th of 1861, a fire broke out that burned most of the buildings on Dubuque Street between Iowa Avenue and Washington Street, if you can picture where that is. One of the buildings destroyed was Matthew Tenetchek's log house, which became a boarding house. It was considered to be the oldest building in Iowa City. I think at least 8 or 9 other business district fires occurred in the decade of the 1860s. One of these days I'm going to access some of these older newspapers, which are rather hard to find, and verify some of that. Remember, when Iowa City was first built or formed, there were probably a lot of log cabin type structures that appeared at the beginning. Now we're going to jump to 1864. Here's an October 19th, 1864 entry from the State Press in Iowa City. It describes the fire that destroyed 13 downtown buildings. It states the high probability of arson as the cause, sadly. It also speaks to the susceptibility of wooden structures to fires and hopes for the erection of more resistant brick structures when put in proximity to other buildings. In the 1870s, increasing numbers of brick buildings were built so that spreading of fires did not take place as readily. In 1855, the Iowa City Fire Company number 1 was formed. The firemen also probably had an engine, quote unquote, which had been approved for purchase in 1856. Here's an image of an early steam fire engine, perhaps similar to one in Iowa City. Steam pumper fire engines were used from about 1860 all the way up to around 1920 to pump water on city fires. The vertical, fast-firing boilers were heavy, but they were very effective in performing their tasks. Subsequent to the downtown 1861 fire, the City Council passed an ordinance to establish fire companies in Iowa City and purchase some equipment. In 1869, the city authorized the building of a new public cistern in the downtown area. Up to about 1870, the people of Iowa City considered a public water supply probably only necessary to fight fires. Iowa City used a church bell for an alarm during the 1870s. They did this by attaching a hammer-like device to the bell of a Baptist church, running wires between the bell and an engine company house close by. In 1872, another large fire broke out in downtown Iowa City. The public could do nothing but watch the buildings burn down. But in the aftermath, the City Council approved the purchase of $500 worth of firefighting gear, which included a hook and ladder apparatus and some buckets. We have to realize what $500 was worth in those days. I don't have a quote for that. The downtown Iowa City Fire of 1872 led to the founding of the Iowa City Fire Department. And on May 20th of 1872, the Rescue Hook and Ladder Company number 1, a volunteer unit, was created to be in charge of the new equipment. On July 10th, 1873, A second fire company called the Protection Engine and Hose Company No. 1 was established. And in the late 1870s and early 1880s, 5 more fire companies were formed. You can see the name of them down below there. I'll address the Iowa City Fire Police. Fire police did not participate in the actual fighting of fires. They were charged with keeping back the crowd because it usually hindered the work of the firemen. Ropes were often used to hold back the onlookers. By the end of the 1880s, there was a network of electrical alarm boxes in the city. The city was divided into 8 sections, each with a different signal to enable firefighters to know which part of town to go to. In 1881, a new City Hall building was erected on the northwest corner of Washington and Lynn Streets. Some of you who were around back in the 1950s remember this building. The headquarters of the Iowa City Fire Department remained in that building until 1961. Also in 1881, the City Council installed a mechanical alarm in the mayor's office. When the waterworks was established in 1883, the council ran a telephone line as well as an electrical alarm from City Hall to the waterworks. You may be interested to know that the waterworks was privately owned all the way into the 20th century. In September of 1882, a fire broke out in that building, that recently built City Hall building. A gas hose dryer was left on, set on low. It's thought that after stores, hotels, and other places shut down their gas, the City Hall gas jets received more pressure, and the resulting bigger flame set some inflammable objects on fire. The hall needed to be rebuilt after suffering serious damage. And no subsequent fires occurred in the building until the fire department remained until 1961. And the gas that was burning in City Hall was not natural gas. The gas manufactured from the heating of coal. Natural gas did not come to Iowa City until the mid-1930s. Many will remember the coal gas plant on the south side of Burlington Street near Van Buren, and that was demolished in the 1980s. Here's a 1952 image with the fire department still housed in City Hall. The vehicles that you see are in today's US Bank parking lot. And you see the Englert off to the left. Now, the University of Iowa suffered a bad fire in 1897. At that time, the University Library was housed in North Hall, not the North Hall that you think of that had the hospital, or I'm sorry, the University High School. But this was a building north of the old Capitol, so it was appropriately named North Hall. There was also a South Hall. North Hall was built in the 1860s. All was not well when at 4:10 a.m. on June 19th of 1897, lightning struck a chimney on North Hall and fire broke out. At the time, North Hall housed the largest academic library west of the Mississippi River, including some 27,000 books. The collection was almost entirely lost in the fire. The firefighters' efforts went unrewarded. The water pressure was low. I will tell of future fires where low water pressure remained an issue. During this fire, the Iowa City Fire Department lost its first firefighter in the person of Lycurgus Kirk Leak, when the roof collapsed and trapped him, knocked him unconscious, after which he burned to death. In spite of pleas for the state to fund the construction of a fireproof building, North Hall was not demolished, but was repaired, and the library was once again established in that building. The Rake Glove Company was probably the foremost glove manufacturer in Iowa City, but others included the Iowa Glove Company, the Hawthorne Glove Factory, and the Ira Curtis Glove Factory. Rate manufactured a very diversified line of gloves. The 1898 fire destroyed the building. Rate was located at the northeast corner of Kirkwood Avenue and Maiden Lane, shown here in 1889. Prior to Rate's occupancy, the building housed the Iowa City Glass Company. At this area now stands the Iowa City Tire and other businesses. In 1901, there was a medical building fire. In 1882, a new medical building was built on the south central portion of the Pentecrest. The building sat in close proximity to South Hall, seen on the left. A fire broke out in the wee hours of March 10th. The flames were fanned by very strong gale-like winds during a severe ice and sleet storm, according to Irving Weber. Couldn't have been worse conditions. According to the Iowa State Press, there was no thought of making the building fireproof. Instead, the newspaper said cheap pine lumber was used, skimping on quality of construction. The paper also condemned the university for building many other buildings cheaply between 1860 and 1890. And this was all reported in the paper the day after the fire. Here's an eerie view of the aftermath, showing the complete destruction. And here's an image of a horse-drawn fire wagon of the day. After the Rate Glove Factory was destroyed by that fire, it was reestablished in the former Iowa City Grape Sugar Glucose Factory building, which was catty-cornered from the present Johnson County Administration building. In 1911, Rate was said to have had Iowa City's largest labor force, employing 75 persons. On June 7th of 1911, a fire broke out, striking the Rate Glove Company for the second time in 13 years. The fire began at 5 a.m. A hose was first attached to a fire plug that turned out to be non-operational. Another plug was found half a block further away. Equipment was slow to arrive, and the water pressure was so low that water could barely reach the second-story windows. The lack of pressure was due to the length of hose necessary and because of small water mains. According to an Iowa City Citizen newspaper article, Rate burned twice at this Benton Street location. So after burning 3 times at 2 locations, the company was again reestablished, this time at 420 South Lynn Street. And guess what? This building burned in 1916, making it the 4th time that the Rate Glove Factory burned. I don't know where it was reestablished, but it was still in business until at least 1927. Now the Metropolitan block fire. Blocks were not true blocks as we think of city blocks, but they were sections of blocks. In 1858, the Metropolitan building stood where the Jefferson building now stands. It was called Metropolitan Hall. Shops were housed on the 1st floor, offices on the 2nd, and a meeting hall on the 3rd floor. Mark Twain lectured there in January of 1869. It was one of Iowa City's largest downtown buildings. On October 10, 1912, a major fire accompanied by a big explosion destroyed Metropolitan Hall. When the fire department employed their hoses, the water pressure was so low that they could only reach the 2nd floor and not the 3rd, where flames came out. The Iowa City Citizen asked, "How long will the city stand it?" The city of Iowa City is paying thousands of dollars yearly to the Iowa City Water Company, that was a private company, for fire protection, and the returns it gets are rotten. These are quotes. There is a 4-inch water main on Washington Street. There ought to be a 12-inch main, as there is on Clinton Street. Small mains cause lack of pressure. According to the history of the Iowa City Fire Department, the fire led to 3 major improvements in the fire department. First, a team of white horses named Highball and Snowball were purchased from the Singmaster Horse Importing Farm in Kyoto, and they served with the department until 1925. They were used to pull the hose cart. Secondly, a motorized 1912 Seagrave fire truck was purchased in January of 1913. It was the first motorized fire apparatus in Iowa City and was housed in the City Hall building. And third, a department with paid firemen was instituted. This is a photograph of the full-time firefighters. The man in the center is James Clark, who served as the chief from 1912 to 1929, and again from 1937 to 1949. He had quite a run. Herman Amish on the left served as chief after Clark's first service, which ran from 1929 to 1935. George Casper, standing, served as chief from 1935 to 1937. Here are some more views of the famous white horse team of Snowball and Highball. And here is a view of a 1912 fire hose truck. As you can see, it's now motorized. On October 2nd, 1922, a second motorized apparatus was purchased. It was the 1922 American LaFrance pumper, which had also been housed in the City Hall building. In 1925, Snowball and Highball were retired from service. This image was made on the day that they were retired. I don't know what became of them. Perhaps some of you can tell us. Next, I'd like to discuss a fire at the Englert Theater. The Englert Theater was built in 1912. It was quite a showpiece in downtown Iowa City. Here we see the original interior. In its heyday, the theater staged many notable vaudeville acts, with such performers as Ethel Barrymore, Ed Wynn, Lynn Fontaine, and Sarah Bernhardt. In the morning of February 13, 1926, a fire broke out in the theater. By the time the fire was contained, it did extensive damage to the interior of the theater, but little damage occurred to the adjacent and connected Paul Helen building. The theater was rebuilt. On June 9, 1928, it screened the first talkie motion picture, The Jazz Singer, starring Al Jolson. Here's a 1932 Seagrave fire engine, similar to the one purchased by the Iowa City Fire Department. It had a 750-gallon per minute pumper and served the department for about 35 years, ranging until about 1967. This is the former property of Mr. Carl Chaddick. Many of you knew Carl. He was a longtime owner of a dirt and gravel business in Iowa City. Chaddick lived to the age of 100. The city purchased his property and turned it into a city park, Chaddick Green. But did you know that a large factory once occupied this land on West Friendship Avenue? It was built in 1901 and housed what was perhaps the largest jewelry factory west of the Mississippi River. At least that's what it boasted. It was the brainchild of a Mr. Willard Main, who established his rural subdivision of East Iowa City at the same time. Other businesses would subsequently occupy the factory, with the last occupant the National Hybrid Seed Corn Company of Anamosa. I might mention that I've had people tell me that they heard of pearl buttons being found in the vicinity. I think when there was a strike at the main operation in Muscatine, someone set up a button operation at this place. It went through a lot of different companies. But the Seed Corn Company was using this building to house about 45,000 bushels of seed corn. A blaze was discovered on Sunday afternoon, December 12, 1937. Again, strong winds fanned the flames. No one was injured. The fire was raging by the time firefighters arrived. Water pressure was low, and firemen were forced to remain at a distance due to the intense heat. The Cedar Rapids Gazette reported the building was the largest hybrid corn plant in the world. On the first 2 days of 1940, January 1st and 2nd, 7 fires broke out in Iowa City. Involved were 3 residences, all with minor damage, 1 chimney fire, resulting in no damage, a 40-foot water tower, resulting in minor damage, and the complete destruction of a recently built residence. The 7th fire occurred in the upper level of Close Hall, then known as the Journalism Building for the university. This was the largest of the 7 fires. The building housed the offices and shop of the Daily Iowan, offices and classrooms for the School of Journalism. It was built in 1890 and at first housed the University YMCA and YWCA. The location was the northwest corner of Iowa Avenue and Dubuque Street, now the site of Biology West. Firefighters endured near zero temperatures while battling the blaze. The lower floor of the structure survived the fire and stood until its demolition somewhere between 1968 and 1970, so some of you would remember that. 2 fire trucks were added to the fire department in the 1940s. This is the 1946 American LaFrance 1,000 gallon per minute pumper. And this is the 1948 American LaFrance 85-foot aerial fire engine. On January 28, 1955, fire consumed the Iowa City Community Center, built in 1936, at the site of today's Robert A. Lee Recreation Center. As the fire raged out of control for almost 3 hours, firemen endured 0-degree weather. You notice a common thread with bad conditions, cold weather, wind, all kinds of things. Prior to the construction of this community building, in 1927, the American Legion constructed a community building on the same site. It housed many different community organizations. This Legion building burned down in 1936 on a day when the fire department was seriously undermanned with only 4 men on duty. After the fire, the city took over the deed and rebuilt the structure. Then in 1962 to 1963, the Robert A. Lee Recreation Center was built on the site. A series of fires which occurred in April of 1962 represented quite a drama. Some of you may remember this. This is the First English Lutheran Church, which sat at the southwest corner of Dubuque and Market Streets, where present-day Gloria Dei Lutheran Church stands. On Sunday, April 1st of 1962, a fire that broke out there resulted in such extensive damage that demolition of the structure was required. That same day, a minor fire believed to be set in multiple places within the First Christian Church on Iowa Avenue occurred. Arson was suspected and later confirmed in the case of both fires. At first, a 17-year-old youth was detained and questioned, a person who had previously been in trouble with the law. A lie detector test was administered, which proved inconclusive. Also, a plan was made to give the youth truth serum at a later date. 2 firemen were overcome by smoke while fighting the Lutheran church fire. One of them, Robert Hine, was hospitalized, listed in good condition. Hine was not to fare so well at a subsequent fire in 1969. After only about 1/2 hour after the discovery of the Lutheran church fire, someone threw a heavy flare through a large window of Jim Dickerson Motors at 325 East Market Street. There was also a minor car fire near the Iowa Memorial Union at about the same time. The initial thought was that all 4 incidents were due to one person. 2 days later, on April 3rd, a fire gutted the interior of the Oath Out Funeral Home at 336 South Clinton Street. It was considered to be the work of arson after finding two hot spots in the building. A man who was staying there with family was killed in the blaze. Investigators later concluded that the Oathout fire was the work of an arsonist. Interestingly, two friends of mine told me they know who the arsonist was. A convoluted set of circumstances resulted in a lack of sound evidence to convict him. On April 7, 1969, a small fire broke out in the basement of the Mercy Hospital addition that was under construction. About 25 minutes later, with firemen present, an explosion occurred that was felt in about a 5-block radius. Trapped oil vapors may have caused the explosion of a transformer. 7 firemen and 1 construction worker were injured. Several firemen remained hospitalized for a number of days. Lieutenant Robert Hine, age 44, a father of 16 children, remained unconscious for at least 23 days after the accident. Subsequent to that, he spent about 2.5 years in a coma and then died on October 15th of 1971. One of his children, Tom Hine, is the golf professional at Pleasant Valley Golf Course and is my golf instructor. We can't let things go by without mentioning the Things, and Things fire, which started in an adjacent building. But it's interesting because of the result of the spraying of water on the fire and the very, very cold day that the fire took place. I hope these things are bringing back memories to some of you who were present at the time that I'm showing these. On November 20th of 2001, the 160-year-old dome of the old Capitol went up in flames. Quote, a construction worker allegedly was using a torch without a required University of Iowa permit to strip away an outside coating, unquote, on the dome. Heat guns and torches had reportedly been used without incident for a great many days prior to this tragedy. The work being done was part of a $900,000 renovation project. Up to $2 million worth of damage resulted, including extensive water damage to the interior of the building. A fire broke out in the Iowa City Landfill on May 26, 2012. By 2 days later, 7.5 acres of the landfill had been consumed by fire. A health hazard existed from the fumes and the smoke. At one point, firefighters thought the fire was contained, but the fire caught the rubber lining and continued to burn. The battalion chief said, quote, it's going to be virtually impossible to use water to extinguish it. The blaze burned for weeks. After the fire was eventually covered and the landfill reopened on June 11th, authorities said the fire smoldered under the layer of clay until August. This was the largest fire in Johnson County history, and it burned so hot that it turned melted tire shreds into pyrolytic oil and created a plume of smoke that spanned the horizon for nearly 15 days. The total damage was up to $5 million. So to kind of end things, here are the current Iowa City fire stations showing their years of establishment. I remember trying to go to the open house at the latest one on Scott Boulevard, but there were too many people there, which was great. Later, I did get a private tour telling them that I was preparing a talk. I pared down my presentation to try to keep it about a half hour. So in summary, like so many towns, Iowa City has had its share, or perhaps more than its share, of fires. We have learned that with many of the fires, blame was frequently placed on improper resources, namely lack of water pressure. It's likely that a good many of the fires had gotten a significant start before the arrival of the firefighters. Many of our fires were the work of arsonists. Typically, large crowds gathered to observe the fires. Crowd control was often necessary, hence the early establishment of what was called the fire police in Iowa City. In many cases, bitter cold temperatures or high winds were encountered, compounding the situations. Early on, steps were taken by the city to bolster the ability to fight fires through the purchase of more equipment and by updating equipment. We should take a moment to salute these brave firefighters, now over 60 full-time ones in Iowa City, for the work that they have done and continue to do to protect us in our buildings in Iowa City, including those of the University of Iowa. I'll leave you with my contact information. Please contact me at any time if you have any questions or comments. Thanks a lot.